Now, last week we looked at the extent of gender-based violence in Uganda, its causes and mitigations. Tonight we delve into the intersection between gender-based violence and HIV/AIDS. Now, in 2007, ActionAid launched the Women Won't Wait campaign to increase awareness on the link between violence against girls and women and HIV/AIDS. And to assess the success of this program 6 years down the road, I am joined by Ms. Harriet Gimbo, who is the program's director with ActionAid. Good to have you on the show tonight, Ms. Harriet.
Thank you.
And you're very welcome. Now, Harriet, you were at the forefront of the Women Won't Wait campaign 6 years ago. Briefly talk to us about the genesis of this campaign.
Thank you very much. The Women Won't Wait campaign was launched in 2007, and it basically focuses on addressing women and girls' health rights towards addressing HIV/AIDS and gender-based violence. And we codenamed it Women Won't Wait, End HIV and Violence Against Women. And it was premised on the findings that we had done that year around a baseline, where we had over 40% of the women that were undergoing violence as a result of HIV and AIDS. And it occurred either directly or indirectly. Directly through sexual intercourse, indirectly through risky behavior, and the other part of it was around failure to negotiate condom use, and then also instances where people were sharing drugs because
antiretroviral drugs.
Yes, because women are like they have good seeking behavior compared to men. So you find that they are the first to get to hospital, they are the first to be checked, and they would easily declare their status. And in most cases, if somebody was put on drugs, then it would mean if she came with it at home, she has to still take it. But then when a man sees slight signs or symptoms and imagines he's sick, then he would want to share with those drugs with that woman.
He would want to share the drugs as opposed to going to the hospital and actually picking his own drugs.
Exactly. So in most cases, they would struggle sharing drugs, and women then would end up developing disease resistance to the drugs. Then in certain instances, they wouldn't afford nutrition, and somebody really had to struggle with being HIV positive. And so the other second reason was around addressing policies and funding streams that address both components of HIV/AIDS and violence against women. And we looked at it as a twin epidemic, because one is a cause and a consequence of the other.
Yes,
that's the kind of work here that we are doing.
Okay, and 6 years into the Women Won't Wait campaign, what would you say has been your greatest challenge?
The greatest challenge has been, people accepting that they are actually HIV positive. Much as we have indications of reduction of stigma and discrimination now, still it is in pockets of households. Countrywide, there is a difference, but in the household, because of unequal power relations, still you find that people hide and they don't want to take drugs. People don't want to go back and test. Couples don't want to go back and test. But when it comes with gender-based violence, you also find that people end up fighting, getting emotional violence, psychological violence, and treating the two becomes a very big challenge. So they don't want to come and report. Or when they report, the cases are bought at some point because they fear to go back home. Somebody might say, why did you go to report to me?
Yes.
And so it creates a little more of violence. Then, of course, we have a highly patriarchal society in Uganda with male dominance. And so in most cases, there is a lot of negative effect back at home. And also the culture is very strong. How do you go and report to your husband, So the women fear and sort of withdraw. The other challenge is evidence collection, especially on sexual violence, where the hospitals are ill-equipped in terms of capacity, in terms of personnel, but also they are not just up to speed with handling a combination of HIV/AIDS and gender-based violence.
So how are you dealing with these challenges?
One critical thing we have done is awareness raising in various forms, to speak to people that these two things are increasingly getting related, and it is very urgent that we must address them if we have to respond to the HIV epidemic, but also to reduce gender-based violence in this country. And then we have also supported economic empowerment for the women, because one of the reasons women keep coming back with cases is because they depend on men. And so we have a huge program that deals with economic empowerment for women. And then the other thing, we also established one-stop centers for gender-based violence response, where there are comprehensive services.
Okay.
You get psychosocial counseling, first aid, you get temporary accommodation in case you cannot go back home. Because women really needed a safe space where they can speak about these issues, where they can be assured of security. And we also support them with personal safety planning and legal aid in that clinic. And then lastly, we have also brought in informal institutions, especially the cultural institutions, because they play a very big role in changing perceptions and attitudes of people. So we have worked with the Bugwere Cultural Union, Iteso Cultural Union, Luru Kingdom, and they have helped us to identify the negative practices that need to be changed in the community if we have to address these two epidemics.
Okay, you talked about these one-stop centers being ideal for women who needed safe space.
Yes.
But what happens, because these women are going to have to go back to their homes.
Yes.
After that. So I come in, I get the psychosocial support, but then I still go back to my husband, who is still going to be meting out violence against me.
Yeah.
How do you involve the men in solving this issue?
We have a clear program for behavior change for boys and men as part of the campaign. And also, of recent, we've of course joined the whole world in zero tolerance against gender-based violence, and a critical thing is male involvement. And so we have a team of men that we codenamed the model men, because they have transformed through, a lot of relationships, a lot of societal behaviors, a lot of community interactions, and they support counseling in communities and so many factors. So men are really with us. Like I mentioned, the cultural institutions is male dominated.
Okay.
And so they are really part of the game, and they are with us in the struggle.
What would you say has been your major success in this campaign?
Our major success has been breaking the silence.
Okay.
Because it is so difficult to speak about your HIV status, and when combined with violence, it becomes more difficult even to talk about it. So we have broken silence, and women are able to speak up and say, yes, this has happened to me, and they stand by it and make sure it happens. The other success, of course, these centers were established as one of its kind in Uganda in the past years. Same for now that we have a little of those centers more. And they offered a lot of learning for the Ministry of Gender, for other stakeholders, and even ActionAid and other countries where we work, in terms of a model that can support women that have been affected by gender-based violence.
Okay, I get the sense that the campaign, and I stand to be corrected, that the campaign seems to focus on gender-based violence that results from an already existing HIV status.
Yes.
But what about HIV being a result of the gender-based violence? Because numerous reports on the subject of HIV/AIDS and gender-based violence show that sexual violence increases women's risk for HIV infection. So how does the campaign specifically address this challenge?
One is that we do have a gender-sensitive counseling protocol, where we also support a lot of couple counseling, where we need to do that, and speak to the women categorically about their HIV status. And then we also help them through succession planning, where they write, like, we take them through sessions that help them, like, declare their status in their households. It's quite, of course, a difficult complication to deal with.
Yes,
obviously. But in instances where they come up and speak about it, we take them through sessions, and eventually they agree and declare their status clearly and speak about it and get onto treatment and manage all the other processes related to that. And of course, like I said, even while we have broken the silence, still there are pockets of those areas where people are still like, should I go or really not to go? Should I speak or not speak? So we really try to balance between interventions that are really appropriate for women, interventions that are appropriate for men, so that we address their interests as a separate category of persons, so that we don't take them as a generalized group. And then, of course, looking at the health facility, we do training for health personnel, clinicians, anybody in the health facility, so that they begin to look at violence against women as part of HIV/AIDS response. So in our slogan, we have said these two move hand in hand, and they are actually twin epidemics, because one is a cause and a consequence of the other, like you said. Because HIV is at some point, on declaring your status, of course, you may get physical violence, psychological, emotional, or whatever effects may come with it. But there is also the reversal, that when it happens, it can actually also fuel violence. So either side, they are both driving factors to each other.
Okay, you mentioned something at the start of the discussion, and what I picked out was violence and threats of violence of whatever nature can affect a woman's ability to either negotiate condom use or to refuse unwanted sex.
Yes.
Now, with the gender-based violence statistics as high as they are against women, what does that mean for the fight against HIV/AIDS as a country?
Of course, if it acts as a disincentive, that people, especially women, will develop a bit of fear to get the services in the health centers that we have. And of course, we will have an increased percentage of maternal death, child death, as a result of HIV and AIDS. Because with the available services of PMTCT, rather, somebody should be able to get to hospital and get treatment even for their children. But if violence is high, then it limits their ability to access treatment or even to negotiate for safer sex, because they won't be able to do that really with the threats in their houses.
Okay, and let's now turn to women living with HIV. To what extent does gender violence interfere with the ability to access treatment and care or maintenance or even adherence to ARV treatment?
Of course, with our patriarchal society, there are several incidences where women have to really work so hard, even in their households, and may not have time even to go to hospital. Or if they have to go to hospital, then it means you have to seek for permission. Can I please go to hospital?
Then you'll have to explain why.
Then you have to explain why you go to hospital. Or you're not breastfeeding because the health facilitator said, no, don't breastfeed this child. Somebody said, this person here doesn't want to help this child. Why are you not breastfeeding, you know? So it will really put people into the defensive and can really hide and not make use of these services that are in the hospital. But also it will degenerate a lot of the gains that we have had over the years, because really this country has made a stride, and many people may just decide to hold back because of fear of violence. And of course, we may have an increment again in the prevalence. We just talked about prevalence here at 7.3%, which is actually the prevalence for women, while the men are still staggering around 6.1%. But already you see the disparity itself creates a crisis. So if gender-based violence is not addressed as a crisis in this country, then we will still have a bigger problem with HIV and AIDS, and the reverse is also possible.
And do you think that it will actually be addressed as a crisis in this country?
Yes, it is possible. I want to believe that it is possible, because they are all the institutions with all the challenges that they have. But I think there is an entry point for us to start addressing these two epidemics. And also with the awareness that ActionAid and other stakeholders have created, there is an indication that actually people are increasingly believing that these two things have to be addressed. And there is a lot of research, a lot of literature, and a willingness of government to address these two issues. For example, in the past, they have developed the post-exposure prophylaxis for people that have undergone, say, maybe rape, any form of sexual violence. That is commitment on the part of government. But I think what we have to struggle with is implementation of those policies. And we also have very good written policies for HIV/AIDS response, for gender-based violence, like the action plan, gender-based violence policy. But the government must resource those for it to give us the results that we require. So we have a ground on which we can step to make a difference in this country. But we need the commitment from all stakeholders.
All the stakeholders.
And above all, a commitment from government as a primary duty bearer in this country.
Okay, now violence against women, whether it is physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, by its nature can affect a woman's self-worth and self-esteem, and as a result impair a woman's ability to take the necessary steps to protect themselves against HIV.
Yes.
How are women being empowered under these circumstances? Because the circumstances are hard, and that's the reality.
Yes.
If I'm a victim of violence, I might want to be able to protect myself against HIV, but the circumstances do not allow me to. What is this campaign, or are there any other programs that you have that are working to empower women to even amidst the difficult circumstances, to strive to empower themselves, to protect themselves against HIV?
I did earlier mention that we have an investment into economic empowerment, because that is one of the areas that makes women really, feel so belittled, because you're dependent on a man. So the beginning point is to make them work by themselves and try to earn something small and make a contribution to their families. The other bit is that we also provide a lot of information to them, for them to really understand what is it about your rights, what is it about where you need to go when you are abused, what is it that you need to do when you get to a health center. So we have a package of information that we provide, and we also use a lot of, in development language, you would call it participatory methodologies, to help them open up and make groups in these communities. So there is a strong community support system of a peer-to-peer counseling mechanism, peer-to-peer support in responding to these issues. And also these women have formed groups of some are survivors, some are mixed with general women, or rather survivors in the community, girls in school, and we are putting them into these groups that periodically discuss these issues. If your colleague has gone through that and they share that in the group, then you have hope that actually I will be able to heal. And also in districts where we've worked with ActionAid, we have all stakeholders with us. Those that are doing HIV/AIDS response, the health sector, the police, the judiciary, and they are part of a wider coalition against gender-based violence. And in that coalition, we frequently preach the intersection between the two, and say even while I'm at police or in the court or anywhere, these two things have to be treated differently and looked at as a cause and a consequence of the other. And I think we are making a stride.
Okay, as we wind this discussion up, any parting shots?
Yeah, the most important one is a call to government and the other related stakeholders to really roll out the post-exposure prophylaxis, because that addresses either issues that we are talking about for people that have undergone sexual gender-based violence, and then also for giving adequate and timely resources to these health centers that we are dealing with. Is a very important issue. And also with the centers that I have talked about, the one-stop centers, they are majorly being operated by civil society organizations. My call to government is to invest in such facilities, because we need that safe space. We need space that women can be able to speak and interact about these issues and get solutions to both gender-based violence and HIV and AIDS. And of course, the whole investment in sexual reproductive health, because it is a clear issue that again cuts across HIV, AIDS, and gender-based violence. And of course, generally funding the maternal health roadmap in this country. I know we have a very good written roadmap, but the budget is still hazy. We need it to be fully budgeted and implemented.
Thank you very much, Ms. Harriet Jimba, for joining us on Let's Talk
Welcome.
Tonight. That was Ms. Harriet Jimba, Programs Director at ActionAid, talking to us about the intersection between gender-based violence and HIV/AIDS. We'll take another break and return with NTV Weekend Sport shortly.